Today about the teacher who changed my life. This specific story spans the whole of his life, right? It's a and this is what we call an underdog story. So at the very beginning, he had a lot to overcome, right? His mother was killed. He was sent to the United States. He met his father, who he didn't particularly like, and he says he secretly resented him for not getting the whole family out of Greece early enough to save his mother, right? So he then was also put into the wrong class, right? So he was put into a class for the mentally retarded only because he couldn't speak English, right? So he had a lot to overcome in the beginning, coming to America. He had a lot of hardship. So we want to root for this person. And underdog stories, we love them in movies, we love them in all kinds of things. So we want to see him overcome these difficulties. And the other thing about this story is that he uses a lot of detail. He uses wording that's very detailed, and it's called showing, not telling. So we're going to kind of go through that today as well. But basically, this is his thesis here. He says, the person who set the course of my life in the new land I entered as a young Moor refugee, who in fact nearly dragged me onto the path that would bring all the blessings I've received in America, was a salty-tongued, no-nonsense schoolteacher named Marjorie Hurd. So a couple of things here. He uses these dashes to insert a little bit of information. So that makes it a little bit longer, a little bit more interesting sentence there. Also, he uses words like salty tongued and no nonsense, which is just unusual. So it catches our attention and makes her a little bit more memorable. We can understand he could just say she was strict, but that's not as interesting as saying she was salty tongued, right? So this gives us a little bit of information. Okay, so we see that he has all these problems, and then he meets Marjorie Hurd because he goes into the newspaper class, right? Because he follows a cute girl, right? That's what happens. And I want to look at this specific paragraph here. It says, a formidable, solidly built woman with salt and pepper hair, a steely eye, and a flat Boston accent. Miss Hurd had no patience with layabouts. What are all you goof-offs doing here? She bellowed at the would-be journalist. This is the newspaper club. We're going to put out a newspaper, so if there's anybody in this room who doesn't like work, I suggest you go across to the glee club now because you're going to work your tails off here. So a few things here. If you guys, one of the options that you will have in your personal narratives is to write about someone who made a difference in your life. And here, he is using a lot of really great description for us to get an idea of what she's like. So he uses words like formidable. That's an unusual word. Solidly built, meaning she's a pretty strong, large woman, right? Salt and pepper hair. He could just say gray hair, but salt and pepper's more interesting. She's kind of got the black and the white in there. Steely eye means, she looks at you. She's very intense, right? And she has this flat Boston accent. And she has no patience with layabouts, which is also an unusual word, which basically just means people who are lazy, right? And then he includes this quote, and quotes a lot of times illustrate, we know what people are like. When we read this quote about her, we know that she is a kind of tough love type of person, right? She is no nonsense. She's telling everybody, hey, if you don't want to work hard, you don't want to take this class, right? So she's very upfront, she's blunt. And so we learn a lot from that quote, but it's much more interesting to understand that from the quote than just to say something sort of general about how she was strict and everybody, was kind of intimidated, that kind of thing. So this is a much more interesting way to go about this. So if you are going to write about a person, this is one thing that I'm looking for in terms of grade and that kind of thing is looking for a lot of detail in there. Okay, so then as we go through, we see that, first of all, the first thing that she does and he is talking about a very large span of life, right? It's his whole life, so he's got to only put in the highlights because otherwise it would get boring, right? It would be a very, very long story. So he's only hitting the very, very highlights. It's like when we watch a sports program, right? And they hit the highlights from the game. We're just kind of getting what were the main things. So she assigned for him to write a story about his life in Greece, right? And then she published it without telling him, which some people say that would make them a little bit angry, but it changed his life, right? Pretty much by doing that and by publishing it, all of a sudden, he started to gain respect from his peers, and also it started him on the path to writing. And so he basically understood what it meant to be able to, or what the significance was of writing, and that set him on his path to become a writer, right? So he said here, for the first time, I began to understand the power of the written word. So that's where she had made an influence in his life. She had shown him the power of the written word, right? And then from there, and it says, he followed the literary path that Miss Heard had so forcefully set him on. He did so well as a journalist, right? He was given a plaque by President Kennedy at the White House. So huge endeavors here, big awards. And so this was a big honor. And also they mentioned his mother as well. And it says here, Miss Heard was one of the first to call me on December 10th, 1987, when President Reagan told the nation that her dying cry, "My children," had helped inspire him to seek an arms agreement for all the children of the world. So President Reagan actually made mention of his mother's cry. So this was a very big deal as well. And again, Miss Heard is still there for him, right? She's still in his life, even though, obviously she's not his teacher anymore, but she's still there. And she says, "I can't imagine a better monument for your mother," with an uncharacteristic catch in her voice. So she really understands the significance of this here, right? And then later on, Marjorie Heard, she's at all the family celebrations, including his 50th birthday, and she becomes a kind of surrogate mother for him, right? She is literally she's at all the family stuff. She knows everything about his life, and this is the true meaning of a teacher who changed his life, right? She's been there throughout his whole life. She's been a mentor, sort of a mother figure. And then at the end, this is again where I was talking about where we set things up and then we say something at the end. So at the end, this is very, very significant. At the very end, it says, a few years ago, I answered the telephone and heard my former teacher's voice telling me, and that won't take no for an answer tone of hers, that she had decided I was to write and deliver the eulogy at her funeral. So this is very, very significant for a number of reasons. Number one, the eulogy is usually given, it's a sort of a tribute to the person, usually given by the person that is most significant in that person's life. So to give the eulogy is very, very important. And also it's a written work. So, he's going to write it and deliver it. And so it shows how much he means to her. So not only did she make a difference in his life, but he also made a very big difference in her life as well, and is a very significant person. But he says, I agreed. She didn't leave me any choice, but that's one assignment I never want to do. I hope, Miss Heard, that you'll accept this remembrance instead. And that's really a wonderful statement as well, because he wants her to see this tribute. He wants her to know before she dies how significant she was in his life. And so, he said he writes a sort of tribute, a eulogy, but he gives it to her while she's still alive, so she knows what she meant to him. So this is a very touching, it's a very emotional, it's a very detailed story about the significance of a person. And those details are really, really important. So I'm going to show you also this as well. This is a slideshow. We're going to take a look at this idea of showing, not telling, because as you go to write your narratives, this is something to keep in mind. So he could have said, my teacher, Miss Heard, was a tough teacher. She wouldn't let anybody goof off. She told everyone they had to work hard. She really pushed us. I learned a lot from her. But this is not very memorable. If I read this, I probably wouldn't even keep reading. It's a little general. It's a little generic. And it doesn't sound particularly interesting. But when he gives this quote about what she says, and he talks about what she looks like, and he has all these great details, now I'm interested. Now I know what she's like, and now I want to read on to see what kind of a difference she makes. So big difference here between just this sort of general start and then adding all these details and quotes and stuff like that. Here's another one. In high school, I did some things that gave me a reputation I didn't want. People labeled me a certain way. I sometimes wished I could escape or be invisible or be somebody else. College gave me the chance for a clean slate. So this is fine. It's a good start. But in here, you don't want to say some things like, I did some things. We want to say what things. And we say, they gave me a reputation I didn't want. Immediately, the reader is going to think like, what? What was the reputation? What happened? All that kind of thing. What was the label that they got? And how did college give them a chance for a clean slate? So a lot of that kind of thing. So here again, this is another example of where a quote is a much better way of illustrating this, because it's relatable to almost anyone who's ever had an embarrassing moment, which of course we all have. So this is something that happened, and this is why she wants to get away, right? This idea that she threw up at a party in high school, right? And no one ever let her live that down. So we get that. We understand that. So that's more important. So that's just something that I want you to keep in mind, and that's what I wanted you to get out of this particular story. All right, thanks, guys.